since the current 5-year plan was launched at Rizwan only 6 months ago, there has been an explosion of activity across the country. Indeed, an unprecedented amount of activity. We have purchased or printed and distributed hundreds of Ruhi books or junior youth materials, hidden words, copies of prayer books. We've had travel teachers and pioneers visit communities across the length and breadth of the country, some visiting for a couple of weeks, some for a couple of days, some moving permanently to new locations. We've had intensive youth camps, junior youth camps across the country involving youth from Invercargill to the far north and everywhere in between. Hundreds of youth. Many of them, just 6 months ago, didn't even know that our community existed, let alone the community building processes that we're working on. And now, only 6 months later, many of them are already serving as children's class teachers or junior youth animators, or in some cases, even tutoring. You see, we're finding that there is receptivity all over the country, especially among the youth and junior youth. But all this amazing activity requires the use of the funds. And so the National Spiritual Assembly has a request. Because it is the National Fund that bears primary responsibility to make sure that these activities are not only maintained, but accelerated. And the truth is, at the moment, as a national community, we are spending more money than we are receiving. But we don't want to slow down our expenditure. We don't want to stop what we're doing just because of financial constraints. We want to be able to accelerate the processes and involve more and more people. So the National Spiritual Assembly sincerely asks each of us now to consider what we can do to further support the National Fund so that we can continue to expand the processes that are so exciting all over the country. Now, although giving to the fund involves money, which is a material thing, it is actually a spiritual principle involving spiritual concepts. The first is universal participation. Abdu'l-Baha very clearly says that we are all to give to the fund. Every adult, every youth, child, we are all to give to the fund. The amount we give is determined by the second principle, and that is of sacrifice. It is up to each of us to individually work out with prayerful consideration between us and God what is a sacrifice to us, and then to give that to the fund. How we give it is determined by the third principle, which is of joyful giving. Because this is a spiritual principle, it draws us closer to our Creator. It is an expression of love, a gift of love from us to this faith that we love so much. And though we give it with pure motives and without any desire for reward or recompense, it is interesting that Abdu'l-Baha, in this prayer book that is very common here in New Zealand, many of us have seen it or even have a copy of it, Abdu'l-Baha says something which indicates that giving to the fund is actually part of material prosperity as well, living a prosperous life. For he says, "O friends of God, be ye assured that in place of these contributions, your agriculture, your industry, and your commerce will be blessed by manifold increases with goodly gifts and bestowals. He who cometh with one goodly deed will receive a 10-fold reward. There is no doubt that the living Lord will abundantly confirm those who expend their wealth in his path." Exactly what form that 10-fold reward takes, well, that's of course up to God. And we know that it will certainly have a spiritual component. But, as we've seen, it's also aspect of a prosperous life, of the prospering of our agriculture, industry, and commerce. In summary, the National Spiritual Assembly of New Zealand sincerely asks each of us right now to consider what we can do to further support the National Fund, so that all of these amazing activities that are happening around the country can not simply be maintained, but can be accelerated. Alawapa.